the MARTA stop's right there.
We know, yeah, someone, are you sure?
A couple minute or two or three.
Sure.
Well, we're certainly not keeping anybody waiting, so.
No, but we are keeping the.
You did the rezoning.
Right. Yeah. I think it's fine. I don't think there's.
All right. Is this being on TV? All right. Let's grab this real quick. All right. Good evening and welcome to the Danvers Planning Board meeting of May 30th, 2023. First item on discussion is a multifamily zoning requirement for MBTA communities, which is the new Section 3A of Mass General Law, Chapter 40A.
All right. I'm just gonna, for a little bit easier, my name is Brian Zakelli, I'm the
Sure.
planning director. I'm just gonna go on up there and share my screen.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Brian.
All right. Good evening. My name is Brian Zakelli. I'm the planning director here in Danvers. Started in January. This is my first time here in front of the planning board, so I'm really happy to be here. Josh has been staffing the planning board for a number of years. I generally staff the zoning board now. That used to be Georgia Pendergast, but she's now going to be staying with CONCOM, Conservation Commission. So I've been solely staffing ZBA now since March. And that's the plan from Land Use and Community Services Department moving forward. I'm here tonight to talk about the multifamily zoning requirement, as you said, that's been handed down from the state, changing Section 3A of MGL 40A. So the agenda for the evening, I don't have a ton of slides. It's about 15, trying to get through this in about 15, 20 minutes, somewhat of a try to get a healthy discussion if possible, and get some feedback. So we're going to talk very briefly about the state's purpose. So no values here in terms of judgment. Like, this is what the state said that their purpose of this state legislation. I'm going to go through what happens if we don't comply. Go through a potential proposed district location and any modifications to the zoning bylaw that we would have to do in order to comply with this new law. And then brief feedback and discussion, and then kind of finish up with some next steps moving forward towards fall town meeting. So the purpose of the new legislation, this has been billed as the reason is that Massachusetts is in a housing crisis. It has some of the highest and fastest growing home prices and rents in the country. These rising costs increase pressure and decrease health, not just for low and moderate income, but for a lot of people. The idea of this new legislation is to create more and better access to work, services, schools, restaurants, parks, in order to by building housing in walkable neighborhoods. Okay. Just continuing with why this new legislation has begun was to encourage communities, MBTA communities. There are about 100 of them, and there's several different types of communities, and I'll go through that super quick in a minute. But basically, we're one of them, known as an adjacent community, and we have to adopt zoning districts where multifamily, this is defined by the state as 3+ units. So multifamily building code has always been 4 in terms of what requires sprinkling and fire suppression and walls, that type of thing. MBTA law has changed that multifamily is defined as 3+ units, and it has to be permitted as of right. This is based on the need to create approximately 200,000 new units in the Boston metro area by 2030. So what happens if we don't comply with this section? So as a new thing, the posture of the state has changed significantly over the past 2 months, in that now State Attorney General is saying that there could be a possible housing discrimination lawsuit against the town, which is a very, very different posture than how this came out several years ago. So that's a new curveball for sure. Really, what's really more for us is that it's not, we wouldn't be eligible for local capital project funds, Mass Works, community one-stop application grant funding, those types of programs. We could get these types of programs. So we could get complete streets design and implementation. We could do corridor studies with this grant money, wayfinding, bike plans, and they range from $20,000 to $4 million. Currently, we actually have applied for 2 grants totaling $110,000. We already have interim compliance now. So we haven't changed the zoning, but we're still eligible for these grants at the moment. I'll explain a little bit about that, the action plan in a second. Does anyone have any questions right now? Please.
I got a quick question. Can we go back to the previous slide just to kind of drill down just a little bit on some detail. So obviously we have in Danvers in Residence 1, we have a lot of, multifamilies zoning, and we have some in Residence 2, really none in Residence 3 unless you're talking, including the EFLAs, which I'm not sure that would apply. So is there a percentage or a number that we have to get to? I mean, because comparing Danvers with a Boxford or a Topsfield or, towns like that that don't really have much in the way of multifamily zoning, how does that relate?
Sure. So I will talk about exactly, it's very specific to Danvers. We need to zone for, not build, but we need to zone for about 1,200 units, 1,176. And that's based upon 10% of our total housing stock. How we're treated differently, because we're an adjacent community, we only have to do 10%. If we were a rapid transit community or a bus community, that would be 20% or 25%.
Okay.
So by us being an adjacent community, because we have to have our district, it can't be kind of in a sea of single-family homes. The district needs to be around, if it's not near a train station, like
Right.
we don't have one, right? It has to be in what they define as an area of concentrated development downtown.
So with the new construction and the new development, is that helping our numbers?
That, I mean, it has nothing to, again, it has nothing to do with how much you build. The zoning down there is so good that we only have to tweak the zoning downtown, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
Okay.
We are very well positioned compared to many other communities. We don't need to overhaul anything.
I would imagine,
We need to
yeah.
tweak, and I'm going to go over those tweaks tonight. Lou?
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a question I have, sort of, and you touched upon it in terms of sort of being an MBTA adjacent community. Now, obviously, we don't have access, we don't have a train station in town. I used the rail trail yesterday. I don't think the train's coming back. However, though, we do, I know that we lost, like downtown lost our bus. We don't have the 465 doesn't run in downtown Danvers anymore. If that were to return, would that change sort of where we stand in terms of, would that make us no longer an adjacent community and therefore makes us a more primary community and therefore we have a different obligation if we get a return of bus service, like some are advocating for?
So, short answer, I don't know. I'm going to
Okay.
be very clear that type of question has not come up, because generally you don't get more service. You either have it or you don't, and maybe it gets expanded, right?
Yeah.
But
We
so-
had it and lost it during the pandemic, and so the question is, if it comes back, especially if we have with Maple Square, if we get any bus transit back, will that affect our obligation? What we have to do.
Again, I would say, I don't know. I can certainly find that out I've been doing this for 2 years, meaning MBTA communities in my previous community as well. So I know this very well. I'm very confident that I know this very well. That question has actually not come up in, I can't tell you how many hours of conversations with the state.
Okay.
But I can find that out. If I had to take a guess, I would imagine it would affect us.
Okay.
You got a bus in there? Great. Now it's 20. Now you have to zone for 20%. That's what the
Even
state
if that
is
bus
looking.
is just taking you to another
It
station.
would take us from an adjacent community into a. It wouldn't be a commuter rail community, but it's. They've actually put buses and commuter rails kind of in the same community, and it's different from light rail.
But arguably, where we are right now, we have the 435 bus that goes from the malls that goes into Salem Station and Lynn along Endicott Street. Doesn't come right through the downtown. Does that affect where we are too?
No, so the current situation we have now, we've been designated as an adjacent community. So there's no doubt that those buses do not. Now, if they get expanded a little bit, again, it's new territory. We could probably make a very good case math-wise of how we wouldn't be able to go from 10 to zone for 10% of our housing stock to 20, just based upon the physical land. But it's a conversation, and I would say it's possible. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess another quick question.
Please, no, please, I mean, I want them, so.
So you create 200,000 new housing units in 2030. Are they going to all be essentially low-income housing? Because how are you going to fix the problem if you spend the money to build a new three-family, paying $300 a square foot today to construct it? Are you going to force the homeowner to make it low income?
No, this has nothing to do with deed restricted housing. You can't even, it's not.
But how does it solve the problem of high rents and high, condo prices if someone wants to buy a condo? How are we solving the problem by building more?
Building more supply will help ease the pressure, no doubt. I'm not saying exactly how much, and I'm not
Because
here advocating for the
I work
state.
with a lot of builders
Yeah.
and developers, and they're still building. They're getting where a few years ago there might have been one home that sold for $1 million in Danvers. Now they're building multi-million-dollar homes in Danvers. So I'm just wondering how building more, and you're spreading 200,000 units over the whole state.
Metro Boston.
Metro Boston?
Yeah, just Metro Boston, yeah. Well, I'm not.
I'm just saying, how does that drive the prices down?
I think.
Especially if you build something new that's going to cost you top dollar to build it.
In this specific case,
Yeah.
for Danvers, we have an affordable housing requirement. So if, it has to be at least 12.5%. So the idea is that if you're
But that
going to
doesn't
be
kick in at 3 units.
I
kicks in
believe,
at
still every unit that's built in Danvers Square, there's still $35,000, I believe, does go towards the affordable housing fund. And when does it kick in, Josh? For
Every net new unit.
no, not the 35K, the 12.5%. I believe it's 4 units.
It's after 5, isn't it?
Oh, a unit.
No, how many units are the minimum required for until a deed restricted unit is required?
It's 5 or 6.
5 or 6. So they're leaving it up to the state. But I mean, the short answer is supply and demand. The more supply you have, it will help. I can't tell you math, but I think everyone would agree. The more housing stock that you have available, the more deed restricted housing that you have available, the better it is for the housing crunch. The real problem is that we have too many jobs and not enough housing near those jobs. We have too many good jobs in the Boston metro area, and we're just not building enough housing to keep up with those jobs. Again, this is my, and not necessarily my opinion. This is what they are pushing out.
Right. I'm just trying to make sense of it, I guess.
Yeah.
Well,
Questions,
yeah.
Tim or Gene?
I'll hold off until we get to the table, where I think we'll talk about
Yep.
the
Okay.
zones and numbers.
So I think where I left off is that right now we've applied for about $110,000 worth of grant funding to do a transportation master plan and then a downtown mobility plan with the Disability Access Commission. So it's specific for Danvers. So these are all Danvers numbers that are based upon GIS given to us by the layers from the state. So our district needs to be at least 50 acres in size. We have to zone, like I said, because we're an adjacent community, we have to zone for 10% of our total units. Our total units right now are just almost 12,000 year-round housing units, 11,763. So we need to zone for 1,176 units with a minimum density of 15 units per acre. That is the number that's given to us, again, by the state that was not in the legislation when the planning board and land use community service division redid the zoning. They didn't have those numbers, the 15 units per acre. Those densities were not out yet when the law. These were all in the guidelines. So the idea is that they tried to peg it, they tried to get it, and I'm going to go through those numbers. They're very close, and we're just going to talk about the tweaks. So like I said, Danvers is an adjacent community. It would be 20% if we did have transit. Because of it's an adjacent community, where to put this zone, the area is clearly in downtown Danvers Town Center, based upon it being an area of concentrated development and that it's zoned that way already. Yes.
Sorry. I was wondering if I could just make one comment. I'd just like to say that
the, we're, the law is for zoning to allow that 1,176 units. It is not forcing us as the town or developers or anyone that those units have to be built. It's not a mandate that those have to be built. Where we sit is we just have to pass or adopt zoning that allows those number of units to be built by right. If that clarifies or.
So where's the 50 acres? Is that a swath going through downtown? How many acres do we know?
We're almost there. Yep.
Sorry, I think Lou had a question, but.
Yes.
Just with respect to the 1,176, and you may be getting to this as well, but, you know, so allowing 1,176 units with this density, is this prospective? These are units that have not been built yet? Or would this include units that have been approved or on the drawing board or exist?
Do not.
Let's say no units have been built, let's say it's farmland, and it would still comply. We are just zoning for it.
Right,
So we just,
but I understand what you said,
Yeah.
that farmland
So-
would comply, but what if you already have, let's say, a very
it doesn't
dense
matter.
Yeah.
area?
Yeah.
It's the underlying zoning that matters. It's what is the zoning. It doesn't matter what's on the ground. It matters what is on
So
the paper.
as-built conditions don't matter?
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
So I think what you're alluding to, Lou, is projects such as Maple Square recently approved.
Right.
Those units would not count towards that number.
They would not count.
They would not count.
No units ever count. Let's put it that way. Whether they get built or they don't get built doesn't matter. It matters the density that the zoning allows. So it matters what's it's on the paper. It has nothing to do what's out there in real life.
Okay. Okay.
Are we creating a new zone?
Not really. So I'm now getting it. Everyone's converging on well, how does this affect us, right? We're here. Here we are.
Okay.
So it should go. There it is. Downtown zoning. This should look familiar. So town meeting adopted the Danvers Town Center and the High Street zoning districts in 2020. The MBTA Communities Act requirements were top of mind. Like I said, the DHED's final guidelines published in 2022 included these minimum densities that were not included in the law, or else we would have the board would have complied at that time, from what I've been told. So this is the High Street mixed-use corridor, and then this is the downtown. This is the downtown live-work. The 40R, the Maple Street, 40Rs cannot count towards this. It's part of the law. So we actually don't need it, but we're not creating any new zones. We are just going to be making small tweaks to the existing zoning. So we don't need to create a new zone. We don't need to do an overlay. Again, we are very well positioned here. In terms of what we actually need to do to make this compliant, at the moment, we see three things that must be changed in order to comply. It's in red. Right now, we define multifamily building, just like the building code has for many years, as 4 or more dwelling units. That will not fly. It has to be 3. So that would have to change. Like I said, this MSTND, this was the
40R.
so this is the 40R, so we're not doing anything. This is already compliant anyway. The mixed-use buildings and the multifamily building are well over 15. We don't have to change it. We can't even use this zone, but it complies with the law if we were to use it.
Why can't you use the zone?
The law says that you've already done it. You've already done the 40R. The 40R is over and finished.
Why can't you count the numbers? It doesn't seem to make any sense.
I very much agree that we should be able to use that zone, but we can't. They have not said exactly why, other than can't use a 40R. You've already changed it. It's already done. And you brought up a question. Many people that have spent time and effort in order to do these very large 40Rs, and then they're just ripping their hair out, right?
It seemed to me that most of Beverly, Rantoul Street would be a 40R because you've got so much density right next to the train tracks.
I mean, they're really weirdly positioned because they have so many trains and they're, the density is, the underlying zoning in most of it, even without the 40R, because the 40R is usually an overlay. The underlying densities for in Beverly specifically, I think it's already there anyway. So I don't think there's much that would have to be changed there because it's so high.
Right.
So to Danvers, the High Street mixed use area, that area all the way to the right, already compliant. We don't have to, we literally have to do nothing other than change what the definition of multifamily is. This is already compliant. In the downtown live work, basically, if you're only doing residential, which is that's what this is, like you want to go downtown, you want to be in this zone in the live work, and you only want to do residential only, nothing on, residential first floor, the whole thing, it's compliant at 16. If you wanted to put commercial on the first floor, it's not compliant. It's at 12. So the easiest fix to all of these is basically do what we're doing here. See, this is 20, this is 20. We just have to do the same and then the math will work out. 16, 16. 12, 12. We can actually be 12 here and can go 12, 16, 20 because the whole district, all three of those zones have to equal 15 units per acre. So we can kind of up zone a little bit High Street, which is what we already did anyway, and then kind of down zone a little bit closer into the non-live work. So to give a little or a lot of credit to the previous planner and the team involved, as well as the director, they got very, very close with no numbers given to them. So again, with just these changes alone, we're 98% there. So just basically not changing the density, it's only really changing the density if you're going to put commercial on the first floor. So it does allow you to go a little bit more, but not a lot at all. So back to the size. There's a long delay here. Okay, so again, we don't need to do anything here. This one's great. 20 units per acre works out. It's 31 acres. So a big part of our zone is coming out of the High Street mixed-use corridor. Next, the downtown live work. The orange part, again, we make the whole thing 16 units per acre at 18.6. And then the red goes to 23.3 at 12. So again, it's pretty much almost exactly what's on the ground already, just changing the densities between residential only and mixed use. So I'm going to go back to the previous slide and see if anyone had any questions.
Tim, do you have a question?
When you said, so I'm having a bit of a hard time, this makes sense, but in terms of the numerator and denominator, 'cause you say actual units don't count, it's just based on what's zoned. So walk me through sort of what's the question in my mind is, because you mentioned that Beverly, because of the height, is sort of already zoned. How do you look at a 3 or more dwelling units building type and a certain units per acre? Like, how do you get the numerator and denominator of units that we're talking about?
So it is related to height and potentially like floor area ratio. We just don't have super high heights in Danvers town center. So that's I was just saying that in Beverly, it's easier to get that density because of there's a lot more height allowed around their train station.
So the same plot in Danvers versus Beverly, for the same type of building type, they get more units counted because they have a higher.
Yeah, because I think their minimum at the time for a while was like 50. Like you could just do by right 55 feet.
And go to 7 stories.
And then in some places 7. So
Trying to carve it down.
simply that is that you could just go higher by right. So because you can go higher by right, another floor, another 8 units or however many you're putting on the density there. So we're trying to respect the zoning that got put in place without essentially, putting 7-story buildings. So yeah,
No, I think I'd be curious to see. I believe there's like a model you're supposed to fill out.
There's a compliance model. It's an Excel sheet that's 100 pages or whatever that basically uses the parcels that spit out from GIS to actually analyze the parcels to determine the capacity. So we need to prove, everyone does. There's an Excel sheet. Again, it's based upon an export from your GIS, and then it shows, okay, this is the actual acreage of your parcels. This is actually how big the entire district is, and it has to comply. And if it doesn't comply, they just say, they're going to say, this doesn't comply for these reasons. You need to change it. We've done the math. We will do a pre-review with the state before we go to town meeting, so we're not like flying blind to town meeting. So we will already know that we can go up and say, this will comply. We have proof. We've had a pre-review, and then that's how it moved forward.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious because the math doesn't quite make sense just based on the slides alone. Well, not that it doesn't make sense. I just like to understand sort of how it works. Because I'm thinking about Lou's question from earlier, which is, are we going to shoot ourselves in the foot and not be able to get the bus back because we're aiming for the minimum rather than 20?
No, that's a good point. I don't know. I can, there's a lot of staff at the state level that are fielding a lot of questions. So that's certainly something I can find out.
One other question was, if the bus goes to the mall already, and someone mentioned the other day about rezoning the mall area, is that something that was considered?
No,
We've talked about rezoning the mall to.
not as part of MBTA, but
I mean, I
Does
think
that count? Is it sort of at your discretion what a like downtown area is? What was on that slide?
yes, it would. There is some discretion. I would say at the moment it's very much not a walkable area, and that probably because of that would not be choice 1, 2, or 3 for an area.
Choice based on, like, it would need to be approved as a walkable area by the state?
Well, I mean, so yeah, they would, it has to be, again, this definition of area of concentrated development. So there still needs to be either there would still need to be zoning there to promote more housing. So yes, we theoretically could do that, but at the moment, it seems unlikely, even if we zoned for around the mall to, let's say, put a whole bunch of housing, it's unclear if they would say, yeah, that's a really good location to do that. Whereas this zoning was, at the time, 3 years ago, was pegged to be the zone. So I don't know if at the time 3 years ago, Liberty Tree was if the idea was to potentially use that, but it quickly got shoved to the side to go forward with downtown.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I'm not questioning the choice, just curious, even if this is what we go with now, and then suddenly oh no, we need the bus back, we got to go for 20. Do you either cram more in here? Do you make it higher? Do you go for the mall? Just thinking about what the options are.
No, I mean, it's definitely, it'd be a good exercise because I don't know the answer.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, we had talked about looking at the mall and trying to get a better bang for your buck at the mall in the sense that there's a lot of, while there's, maybe 4 or 5 anchor stores, the interior of the mall has been suffering for a while, and a way to try to develop it like the Linfield Marketplace to add a little bit of housing adjacent or around it or even on top of it, to try to beat that up. But if that's going to conflict with this and require us to have even more housing, I don't know if that's a great idea.
I mean, the good thing or bad thing about zoning is that you can always change it, right? So, I mean, it's totally possible that we could do downtown, and then we could potentially designate a different district. I mean, I think it'd be I don't think anyone is going to believe that in the next few years that Liberty Tree is going to completely change over to a whole bunch of residential units, but I don't know. It's a good conversation to have because I've been asked this question many times on what's happening with Liberty Tree. I get it a lot. That and Denny's. I'm nearly there.
Question about just the, I don't want to jump, Gene, did you?
No.
Lou has a question.
Yeah, just a question. I mean, and I know you said this already, Brian, just in terms of the numbers, I'm just looking again at the numbers in red versus green.
Yes.
And what would take us into compliance? And this is for the 2 red areas that we have?
Yeah, it's just to match what they just need to match. So
Yep,
the green needs to match the red. So this
Oh.
1624,
yes,
1624.
okay,
1224, 1224.
got it, okay.
So previously, you couldn't build a residential only building
Right,
by
right,
right. You could, but you couldn't do it by right. This law is forcing all the cities and towns to be able to build residential only by right
Yeah.
at 15 units per acre. What most towns are doing is they're doing, all right, you get 15 if you do residential only, but if you put mixed use on the first, if you put commercial on the first floor, we'll let you go to 20. Something like that, an incentive to put commercial on the first floor. I think we felt this was the by far easiest and smallest tweak to the zoning to make it compliant.
Okay.
So to your point, Tim, like we're not shooting over, we're not trying to, go above and beyond.
Okay.
We're trying to do the easiest in a, that sounds like a bad way that we're like,
Simple?
yeah, so we're trying to do the simplest changes to comply.
No, thanks for that. And the only thing I would say, again, in terms of, just in terms of concern so much, is just, questions is to find out about sort of any potential changes in transit, just because, because with bus service, because that did change relatively recently, and there's always, if there's a possibility that it returns, how would that affect us?
There's no doubt we can get that answer.
If we can get that info,
Yes, yeah.
that'd be great. And then also, in terms of, I know you indicated that we have an interim compliance. What is when is our drop dead in terms of when do we need to have this all?
December 25.
December of 2025?
25.
December,
of 2025.
thank you, okay, got it.
But this is slated for the fall town meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess previous zoning town meeting that we had, there was an ambitious list of probably maybe 15 articles, I can't remember exactly. And it was pared down in discussion with the board because it kind of came up, not last minute, but some of them were relatively last minute, and trying to vet as to, why are we proposing this? And we didn't feel that had really gone out to the public. Particularly and specifically now, it's kind of making sense to me, where there was a proposal to make, I think, residence 1 maximum of 2 units. You couldn't expand a duplex to a 3-family. And I think the argument was, well, we got this new zone downtown, and we want to kind of concentrate all of our multifamily 3 or better in the downtown strip, if you will, between the highways. So that seems to me that might have been the justification for that, because I never really found out where that motivation for that article came from. Because usually when we talk about zoning articles, there's a presentation, there's either impetus from the building inspector saying we're having some issues with the interpretation of this zoning bylaw, we need to fix it, or we as a board come up with things. So my concern is that, if we approve this, is that still going to be kind of the motivation? Are we only going to allow this type of zoning concentrated in this area? So if I live on Ash Street, for example, and I have a 2-family, and now I go in front of the ZBA and I want to make it a 3, am I going to get some pushback with the argument, well, you're 2 streets too far away from where we're trying to concentrate this housing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the only thing I can say is that the intent of the zoning district at the time 3 years ago is 100% the same. I don't think this change is going to do anything. You're trying to say is it going to kind of, make that case even more so that for the zoning board to not approve something that's not, yeah, I see what you're saying. I don't know if this current legislation would change anything. I think the intent of downtown was to, let's put more units downtown. If that's how it was billed at town meeting, that we want to put more units downtown and less units in other places, Yeah, that's a policy directive of how you get something past town meeting. You certainly wouldn't be able to, you wouldn't want to go against that if that's how you got something passed. But that's not really what you're asking.
Well, I didn't want to restrict, on the other article, I didn't want to restrict property owners' rights without them knowing about it. So I think we felt that wasn't fully vetted to the townspeople of, residence one,
Yeah, I mean,
that they could potentially lose a property right by a town meeting vote.
no, I would say that there's no change in the intent. You're talking about a couple of, I mean, in actuality, you're talking about a couple of units difference in between what's on the ground right now. Sorry, what's on the zoning bylaw right now and the zoning change. You figure a downtown parcel's maybe a quarter acre, a smaller one, a quarter, maybe a half an acre. So you're talking about a difference of 2 to 4 units at the end of the day on one project. How many projects are going to happen in any different, I mean, it's not hundreds of units difference. It's not.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't think, I think any zoning board should be implementing the zoning that's currently there, meaning, and shouldn't be basing their decision on the concentrated area of development over here. It's what are the laws that says, can you expand here? Okay, and does it meet that? Does it meet that? They shouldn't be doing that. Meaning, they shouldn't say, well, we can't give you a unit here because we want to put all the units over there. You should say, we need to evaluate this zoning application based upon the zoning on the ground. So these are the other potential little changes that we don't want to change, but the state might require it. We don't know what to tell you here because we don't know. This is just a full brainstorm of every possible thing that the state might say, well, this is borderline, this is gray, So the only thing that's very clear is that you cannot limit you cannot limit the number of bedrooms. You can't say anything about bedrooms in terms of a limitation. We don't do that, but we limit other things related to bedrooms. Those two things are parking and usable floor area. So where that's in the zoning is that parking, based upon a certain number of bedrooms, you have to supply a certain number of parking spaces. 1 bedroom, it's 1 space. 2 bedrooms, it's 1.5. 3 bedrooms, it's 2. We don't know if that's compliant or not because it's a nuance that is just not been answered. So that's what a pre-review would require. Out of all the things that can change, again, it's just those 3 numbers that we're trying to change. If we have to change something related to bedrooms, that's related to parking and usable floor area. It basically says in a number of in a 1 bedroom, you have to have a minimum square footage. It's gray of whether are we limiting bedrooms or are we not? It's like, well, we're not really limiting the number of bedrooms, but maybe they could construe it that way. So out of all the possible things that could potentially get changed, these are the 2 things, bless you. These are the 2 things that we think we're not planning on changing, but we've flagged them because we think the state might. Questions? I don't know how much information I'll have because the state, like I said, this is a nuance. This is not really part of the compliance model. Because it'll say, do you limit number of bedrooms? No. However, right? It's a however. So we don't know.
So,
Lou?
so a question, I guess, in terms of, parking, I mean, can you anticipate, I would imagine, they're trying to encourage use of transit and walking and such and bikes. So I could imagine, I would find it difficult for them to say, well, that we need to increase like the parking number, so which could, or lower it. Okay.
If anything, they would want to lower it. Excuse me. Again, we would change
lower
nothing
it because of, again, that would potentially discourage a greater number.
because you're limiting the bedrooms through back door of the parking.
Got it.
You're like, oh, well, we don't limit bedrooms, but you need 17 spaces to do a three unit.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that's just an exaggeration to show you how you can limit the bedrooms through
Right.
parking.
Okay. Interesting.
It is weird. Anyway, the hope we do 3 changes. We change 4 to 3, and we change those 2 densities. That's it. The absolute most is that we have to do something with this. So, action plan. So how do we have interim compliance? So the state gave all the communities a certain amount of time, depending upon who you were, adjacent community or not. A certain amount of time to come up with are you going to comply, and if so, what are you going to do? So I started work here January 4th and submitted an action plan that was due, 20 days later. So I was working with, Josh and the rest of the people in the planning department, as well as Aaron Henry, who basically said that this was essentially a directive from senior leadership that we are going to try our best to comply, because that was the whole point of the zoning to begin with. So the idea is we're going to try to make good on that. What the action plan is, we had said that we are going to try to comply by using the downtown district, and that we're going to try to average 15 units per acre in the downtown district. Like that's essentially the whole action plan, is that we're trying to do that. And then we gave a timeline on what we thought was possible. We did not think that this was an extremely long on-ramp based upon the zoning that was in place. Like I said, many other communities, it's a full cloth nightmare, to be honest, because they just don't have the land, or they don't have sewer, or there's like a lot of really much bigger problems. So the goal is to get a little bit of feedback. I've been getting a lot throughout. The very clear message I've heard from you is based upon how could this potential district change, or based upon any type of increase in transit, whether it's a bus or something different. Maybe there's a lot more other types of micro transit, like small vans, small buses, these types of things. So it's not necessarily MBTA, but like paratransit. Is that going to affect it? I will certainly get those answers. Again, that I'm not worried that we wouldn't get that answer. They will have an answer for that. So where we are right now is to draft our articles for town meeting, changing the zoning bylaw, based upon a little bit further feedback. How we're going to do that is we're going to review with town council what we have so far. And the idea is to have at least one more meeting sometime in next month or in July. I know that's kind of a tough time in general for zoning. But leading up to fall, this was the timeline that was kind of handed to the department. We would then make some final edits in August, then get that pre-review by the state in September, which will most likely, if there's going to be any changes, they would be minor based upon initial feedback that we've received. And that the public hearing would be in that September-October range for a November town meeting. Any questions on the current timeline, and whether you think that does this timeline appropriate? That's probably the biggest question I have for this evening, for you, is what do you think of this? Honestly, what do you think of this timeline? Basically, it would be another year from what I hear, simply because most zoning initiatives are done in the fall.
Was this meeting publicized to town meeting members? This particular meeting?
No.
No, because this was
Explicitly, you're saying, or specifically to town meeting? No.
So don't we need,
Well, this is not a hearing. This was more of an information session,
Oh, yeah.
feedback session with you, and then the idea is there will be a public hearing, an actual.
Well, there has to be.
There has to be a zoning
Yeah,
hearing,
yeah.
but that's in later. I'm talking about in June, July, there would be more of a, we can certainly reach out to town meeting members,
for
but it's going to be much more of a rollout. But we didn't want to roll it out to the public
Sure.
without at least getting the board. Does this timeline make sense?
Yep.
Are there any glaring, we need to get all the glaring questions, the big questions out of the way, so we don't roll this out to the public at the same time we're rolling it out to the planning board.
sure. I'm assuming the 50 acres is satisfied?
Yeah, so it is satisfied. We actually have to do more. So I'll explain that. So it's a minimum of 50 acres. The requirement is a minimum of 50 acres. We could do a minimum of 50 acres, but we need to zone for 1,176 units.
Right.
So if we did that, the density would actually be much higher than 15 units per acre. It would be closer to 21. So we decided to just use the existing downtown district, the whole thing, and then have this tiered approach, 20, 16, 12, based upon the existing zoning.
But we don't need any other sections of the town.
Nope.
We don't need to involve Holton Street or anything like that.
No. So
we've got enough
I can
acreage.
go, the exact number that we have is right there. So it ends up being close,
72 or something.
about 70.
Yeah.
70. If we did 50 acres, so you can see the numbers.
Yep.
Those are at 20, at the densities of 20, 16, and 12. If we like, for example,
That's with
let's
the
say
new
we,
changes. That's with the corrected changes.
right, so if we, for instance, if we just did 50 acres,
Mm-hmm.
if we just did,
30, yep.
you know, this and well, really, yeah,
Yeah, that was it,
like
right.
these two,
Mm-hmm.
the densities wouldn't be 20 and 12. It'd be,
They'd have to be higher.
it would either, they would both have to average out to something like 21, 20, they would both have to be like 22. So we thought it'd be better to spread the density out, not change really anything in terms of the zones or the locations. We were talking about rezoning parcels and putting some in from the downtown core into the live work, and we're like, this is too complicated. Let's do what we need to do to be compliant.
So I guess on, Josh, what was the one that we did last year? Was it Cherry goes to by the bank there? Remember the guy that came in front of us?
13 Essex?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Essex
Essex.
Street.
It was a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So now,
Oh, he's in live work.
essentially,
Um,
he would have it by right to do the 3.
He had 3 and he was trying to do 5.
Okay. But anyone else on that street, if they had a single family, could just by right expand to a 3, is
If you
what
go
you're
back
saying?
to the table, sorry, Jim, I didn't mean to cut you off. So, live work. Oh no, it would be the same. We're not changing that number. In that particular example that you're describing. That live work orange,
Okay.
that we're proposing not to change that by right or special permit number. So that's that green box right in the middle, downtown live work, multifamily.
Yeah.
So that number's not even being changed. Now, if he wanted to put a store on the first floor or any office, he would just, we're just maybe potentially modifying that 12 to 16. So it looks like
But I
that.
mean, a particular landowner on Essex Street, if they had a single family, couldn't come in and apply to put 2 stories above and make it a 3-family? Couldn't,
I think at the time it's because you couldn't do a multifamily unless it was 4. Is that right?
It got
well, no, I'm saying, I mean, there's an existing
3.
2 or 3 that people have in that neighborhood. I'm wondering if the ripple effect, that's what I'm alluding to, will that now allow them to, hey, we can get a 3-family, and you can't, it's by right. You can't say we can't do it now.
well,
No, I mean, there's other regulations. It's just the density that has to be by right.
but I guess your question, Jim, could someone right now who has a single now go to 3 by right? Well, we're not modifying that number, so whether they can today or even in the fall, that won't change because we're not modifying that number. But it's all based on the size of the property, right? That really dictates like a lot of this. Does that make sense?
Well, if they had enough, say they met all the zoning requirements, front, side, setback, and all that, and they just went up, and they had a big enough driveway. Could you,
Well, I mean,
They could do that now. They
Yeah,
could
from
do
what
that-
I understand, they
Yeah.
can do that now.
Right now, they could do that.
Or
Yes,
here.
you could go from a single to a 3. Well, I
It's
guess
possible they just didn't have enough
Well,
space,
I guess-
didn't have enough square footage to get the units per acre. But I mean, you can go up to 16 units per acre right now by right.
I guess the only difference, Jim, that brought up is as we speak right now to potentially in the fall would be 3 to the 4. You could go down from 4 to, you could go from 4 to 3. I guess that's the only kind of,
But I still think, to your question, I still think that in that specific case, we're not changing the density for that situation. The only thing we're changing in the live work is whether or not, if you had commercial on the first floor, you would only be able to do 12 by right. With the new change, this 12 is gonna go to 16.
so probably only in reality, you're getting maybe a unit or two, depending on how large that parcel is.
Right.
You know.
So if you figure a half-acre parcel, you might be able to get another 3 units more. Again, that number is not changing in that specific situation.
But before, you might have had to get a variance, or no?
You
You're
just
saying it was
couldn't.
by right before, I'd have to get zoning board relief, but now I can just go in front of the planning board without having to get that relief, if it's by right?
Yeah, well, if it was between this 12 and 16, yes, that would be the only case. Whereas if you were trying to do 13 before, you would need a variance.
Right.
Sorry, I take that back. You could go up to 20, it would be a special permit.
Oh, yeah, that's
Whereas
right.
before, you would be a special permit to do 13.
Right.
Now,
That's right.
now it's by right to do,
That's right. It would come in front of this
16.
body. Right.
so the by right, it's only going 4 more units per acre. So you're talking about essentially 2 more units that you're getting with the change.
But you don't have to go in front of the ZBA.
Correct.
You
Well,
would-
for that,
It would go to the planning board for a special permit.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So that,
But you've never needed to go to the zoning board for a variance. You could always go up to 24 through a special permit with the planning board. 24. So this is the by right, the special permit. So this is currently what we have right now. So you were never really, unless you were going to try to go above 24 units per acre.
25.
Right. If you were at 25, then you would have to go to zoning board.
Yeah, we've discussed.
That's
yeah.
still the same. That's actually not changing.
is the Bank of America building, is that in the zone?
Yes. Yeah. The first on
Well,
Elm.
that's for sale, so
Yeah.
you could go,
Well, if you go back to the map, Brian, sorry.
you could go above, you could
It-
go
That's
higher than that.
so for reference,
You could put
that's
residential.
that's red in it, so it's in the core. So if you go back to the other table, Brian, sorry to go back and forth.
I just don't wanna-
So that's in the core. So right now it does have commercial on the first floor, so we're not really even modifying
Wouldn't change it.
that.
It wouldn't even change that parcel or any.
Right.
There's no change to that parcel according to this.
But prior to this zoning, before we added this zoning, you couldn't put residential on there, could you?
I believe that we didn't allow residential
Yeah.
in C. Didn't we call it C1 or C1?
So now, I mean, I'm just saying, for sake of argument, this zoning allowed them to now put residential above there if they want.
Yeah, so the zoning that happened in 2020 was the mass transformation.
Right, for sure.
I feel very confident in saying that we're trying to make small tweaks. But it was a huge sea change to
Right.
make this happen.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the ripple effect and see if there's do we lose anything by doing this?
You probably, on the few projects, realistically, if the decision was whether or not this person was going to either move forward or not, meaning if they're like, oh, I don't want to do a special permit, and then they decide to, you're talking about like some opportunity cost lost, you're potentially looking at, for each project, potential 4 to 8 units less. That's, so we're talking, I don't know, maybe we lost out on 25 units or something like that. I can't imagine.
Lost out with our existing zoning?
Yeah, meaning that if we had this zoning, if we had the changed zoning, what we're trying to propose, if that was on the books
Yep.
in 2020,
Right.
and then we look till now, probably somewhere in the 20 to, maybe there would have been another 20 to 30 units that would have been allowed, something
Okay.
like that.
So that.
This is a back of the napkin, because
Right.
we're talking about people that did not come to us because they didn't want to go to a special permit. That's really hard to
Right.
guess.
Determined,
But the
right.
converse, though, is 20 to 30 units, so if this is going before a town meeting, for example, you would know that this could open the door to potentially 20 to 30 more units or something. Is that what you're,
I would not say that in front of town meeting, because I wouldn't be confident enough.
all right, okay,
No one would be confident enough to say that.
got it.
The idea is that what we can say is that on all these projects now, on a typical half-acre parcel, you're getting 2 more units.
I guess that gets to another point that we talked about in previous, zoning meetings with the other boards philosophically and in planning for the future. We're encouraging this development downtown. I think we've had this stuff on the books for 3 years. We've got the big project going on, which is in the 40R. Hasn't been a lot of, really, any development with respect to, we had the one above the suburban.
Yeah, it's like
Which
9
was-
units.
Which came in actually before the zoning, but other than that, really hasn't been a lot of development as part of this legislation. So we had talked about trying to make it perhaps a little bit easier for the developer to come in, if we're encouraging that.
Right.
How do we get the developers to come in and go through this, this tome of regulation to make it worthwhile for them to do it? We had somebody at CVS supposedly wanted to do something. We never heard from them. We got the hardware store that has changed ownership. I don't know what the horizon looks like, but how do we attract or encourage the development where it's kind of been quiet for the last, since its inception?
It's a really good question, because I think you're leading in not just about zoning, but you're really talking about placemaking that Danvers Down Center desperately needs. A lot of developers want to go into downtown Danvers, but frankly, there's not a lot to do there. We hear this from high school kids. We hear this from little old ladies. We hear this from middle-aged men. I mean, we hear it a lot. And the idea is chicken and egg. Do we build a whole bunch of housing and then the services come with it? Or do we try to do some more placemaking to make developers want to try to develop this area? The short answer here is that right now we're doing a little upzoning here, a very, very small upzoning. Again, on a half-acre parcel, we're talking about 2 more units. It's not a big thing, but so that does help a little bit. But that's not going to help. I mean, that's not going to make a whole bunch of developers decide to invest in downtown Danvers. There has to be other things. That's why we want to do a transportation master plan. That's why we want to do a downtown mobility plan. So how are people getting around downtown? Is it safe? If it's not, what do we need to do to make it inviting so that people feel that they could walk and bike downtown and, be safe?
Great. I think that's definitely something that I'm just wondering for the fall town meeting, other than this particular article.
Sure.
And perhaps I don't know if we're going to have a report for the new board that I think Lou and I were
Right.
Ready for that, for the historic district
So
review.
I know that, I think the historic district is in the pike, and then also the potentially the adaptive reuse bylaw as well.
I think.
Yeah,
Those are going to be rolling out. So I don't have a hand in those.
Yeah. I'm just wondering how many articles we're going to present.
And then we
So, yeah,
we internally have this question.
there is, so in
Yeah,
terms of
often.
what I'm focusing on
Yep.
in our department,
Mhm.
this is kind of a, let's do this. We know exactly what we're doing here.
Right.
It's not a large ask. The only other thing that our department is planning at the moment, we're working with an attorney named Mark Borbowski. Some might know that name. So this was before my time here. We had worked a deal out, or we hired him, had a contract with him in order to kind of update the zoning as a housekeeping article. So
Yep.
and it's unclear exactly how large this housekeeping article. The main idea there is not to change policy. It's, it's to update it, for it, it says he shall bring his application to the zoning board. Like it's really like updating in terms of like bringing it into the 21st century. outside of non-policy potentials for that article, the only thing that's potentially talking about is using the terms variance and special permit so that they actually correspond to the state law. And so that variances are given when variances are necessary and special permits are given when special permits are necessary. We kind of blur the line there. Again, we're not trying to change a whole bunch of policy, but just getting it updated. Once we have something from Mark Bobrowski, that will get, we will have, as part of the September, October meetings, and then with these other things in the pike, we're going to be talking about that. But for me, it's what we're calling this housekeeping article. It's not on here. I'm just getting to the timeline here. Sorry, here it is. So somewhere in the July to August is from what I understand, we're going to be we'll definitely have a public hearing, but we're going to be talking about what this housekeeping article is. Again, not trying to change policy, but just having an update.
So typically, we don't meet in August, but if we need to meet, I guess we can work that out, with the board.
We can work around that. I don't think the meeting needs to be in August.
I know
Yeah.
I don't know what we have next agenda, if there's a lot coming up, or we haven't had a lot of items on the agendas lately, so just for whatever reason, I guess we
Yeah,
can.
just,
Well,
I don't know.
As soon as I know about,
Right.
we should be having a meeting with Mr. Bobrowski, hopefully within the next 10 days.
Mhm.
I'm hoping he will give us a lot of information that we've been clamoring for, which
Okay.
is what do you have for us and when?
Yeah.
So he's just been busy. He's a busy guy. So that's what I'm focusing on, these essentially two articles, the MBTA 3A change, and then this, again, we're calling a housekeeping article. Lou?
Jim, just-
Go ahead, Lou.
There's a question also with respect to sort of other, I know Jim has mentioned this at other meetings before in terms of house, any sort of, since this downtown zoning has been in effect now for a couple of years, are there any also sort of obvious sort of lessons learned, anything that let's say you've heard from developers or from others that this is a concern, this is a problem, this needs to be tweaked? So while we're making adjustments to this downtown zoning, is there anything else that we can do that can sort of make it more attractive, more usable, et cetera?
Not really. There are a couple of small inconsistencies that we have found that could potentially be, I don't know if we want to call them Scrivener's errors or not, but there are a couple of inconsistencies. I want to say it might even be with the number. Is it number of
Or just like in the
use table? Like there's definitely some issues in the use table where it's inconsistent with itself, and not a lot of places. It's literally like one or two places. But in terms of policy, you're talking more about kind of policy, or is like this portion of the bylaw is not working.
It could be both. It could be something. It could be policy, or it could be something that just is maybe something the use table and the numbers don't match up or something, and it causes maybe some frustration or questions or what have you.
Yeah,
So it could be both.
So definitely there are a couple of small concerns in the use table. The only other thing that I can think of is that for the mom and pop that's trying to just put maybe 1 unit or 2 units above
Right.
their shop, the 35K is problematic for some of them. For the
Yeah, that's what I've heard, the expenses. It's very expensive.
well, so we're telling people early and often, before you do the math, like, here's the math. That, and 35K for some people is whatever, building it into the spreadsheet, I'm doing that. And for other people are like, I'm not doing this. I can't do this. This is not happening. So, yeah.
It's certainly a barrier, especially so what Brian's alluding to is every net new unit downtown has a $35,000 affordable housing mitigation fee associated with it. So for the smaller projects, when you have a small parcel, and it's usually, when the building is taking up the whole parcel and they just want to put an apartment upstairs or 2, let alone the parking issue, it's this affordable house.
Just to make the property more viable, or,
Right.
you know, or to physically live up there. I mean, it's just, it's a little difficult. I'm not against it. I'm just hearing, you're asking me, what am I hearing?
Right.
Those, I mean, I have heard that.
Yeah.
Can that be adjusted? Can we adjust it or add some
Yeah.
sort of language that?
We can adjust anything.
Yeah,
We can
right.
adjust all of it.
But-
Again, I'm not saying that we need to do this and this is a problem. It's certainly Josh used a good word. It's a barrier for the really small projects where they're struggling already. They're trying to look at all their options. Do I sell now and lose money here? Or can I do a little small development project, start getting some rent? So that's difficult math. People are sharpening their pencils, and it's just not sharp enough.
You know, the the larger projects, you know, like the Maple Squares, I mean, we're not gonna ever get anything that big, but, you know, if you're doing a 20, 30 unit project and you end up just doing a couple units and then there is some fee associated with it, you know, when you're doing such a project at that scale, the numbers can work, but it's the smaller projects that.
Why
that-
can't it be a sliding scale? Because I know, like on Cherry Street, you know, if certain developments went to the 6 unit, you might have said, okay, well, this doesn't have to be a low-income unit, but give us $15,000 to the affordable. And that's what's been done in the past.
Yeah.
It was almost all communities that it was always horse
So
trading.
where did 35
Yeah.
come from?
Yeah,
I don't know.
it was. I don't know. So that was based on.
So if you added 20 units, it's a $700,000.
You know,
price
it's
tag.
it's an interesting chart where it's a combination of units and or
Money.
payment. So
Oh, okay, so affordable
Yeah.
units.
so
So
essentially,
you add a few affordable units out
so
of
at the
that.
20, you're probably
3.
doing 2 or 3 units.
Yep.
You're doing
and-
12. You're doing 12.5% of them have to be deed restricted affordable above 6. We went and
Right.
that number is based upon around 6. The money starts to at least shake out a little.
Right.
It's those 4 units where you're paying 35,000 for
Right.
4 units.
Right. When you're paying the 10,
Where you don't, yeah, it's
the
like you're not
155.
required. You're not required to give a unit yet. So until you have a total of 6 net new. So that 35 it's for those 5 units. It's hard. Once you get above that, you're giving
it's
more than
35.
35. You're giving a unit, which is certainly
Right.
more than $35,000.
So it's not 35 per unit.
It is net per unit.
Up until
five.
On net units.
I can bring up the zoning bylaw that
Yeah.
shows, it's a chart, basically. It says that if you have this many units, this is how much has to be affordable, and also this is how much money you have to give. The larger the project, the more units you're giving, but the
Right.
less money.
Yeah. But on the small projects, it doesn't work.
They're
So
tough, they're
Yeah.
tough.
If we try to do some type of sliding scale, I think it would,
I think that totally makes
I
sense.
think you're gonna get a lot more development. I think that's what I was hearing a lot of people say. It doesn't make sense.
From a policy standpoint, that if we were going to change policy at this town meeting, that type of change would
It's
that-
worth pursuing.
It's
Put
a
it that-
tweak.
put
It's
it that
not, we still have the intent of getting the affordable housing, but typically the affordable housing wouldn't kick in until you get over 6,
Right.
5 or 6.
right. Or
So, but to burden someone with a $35,000 per unit,
yeah,
it doesn't, that's
mean,
why it's not happening.
you could even, I mean, I'm not, you know, this would be a larger conversation, but even if you even reduce that number of in some nature, right? It probably would be helpful for the smaller projects.
So if you went 5,000 per unit up to the 7th unit would be 35,000 or something
Yeah,
like that.
I think the math that was used, I'm pretty sure, so David Fields, the previous planning director, did have an Excel sheet that I have in my head now that I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And it was based upon.
It's like housing costs
Yeah,
per
it was
unit.
it was
in Metro
basically.
Boston or something.
Yeah, it was based upon how much does it cost to build that unit? And if you were to supply a unit, how much are you essentially losing by supplying that unit, and then doing a fractional amount for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Once it's 6, we're basically saying, forget the money, we want the unit. So it's saying how much does it do to, how much does it cost to make that unit? Let's say it's $200,000. Let's just say. Then you would then divide that by 5, and then that's where you get, that's where you get it.
Yeah.
So it is real math. It wasn't just 35.
No, I know. I'm just saying it, I guess, if you want to encourage larger developers to come in and buy up tracts of land, like a Windover or someone like that, who is gonna build the 100 units, I guess, which doesn't really fit for our.
Right.
But that's not the problem. Like those bigger developers, they're giving 12.5% of the units as deed restricted or affordable. They're giving a lot of units, which they're fine doing,
Yep.
because they're doing it hand over fist all the time, all over Massachusetts.
Right.
It's really not the big it's what I don't think that it's the Windovers and other larger developers that are saying we're not going to develop in Danvers because of the 12.5%. That's kind of like
Standard.
routine now.
Yep.
In a downtown district. It's the problem again, it's somehow tweaking the so that you can get just one more floor,
Right.
right? It's a 2-story, you want to make it a 3-story downtown, totally makes sense. People want to downsize, they don't want to leave Danvers, they love it. There's not a lot of great options. So the idea is that why shouldn't a mom and pop shop be able to very easily just put 2 or 3 units above? And the idea is that from the intent of that money was obviously like we're losing out on all these projects that are less than 6 units for the deed restriction. So we're still getting, the denominator is growing of our subsidized housing inventory, and the numerator isn't. So the idea was like, well, if the numerator isn't growing, let's at least get some money, put it into a fund, and we can build units that way.
Or you say you pay that 35 over 3 years. So there's more than one way to skin a cat to make it easier for the builder. If someone's gonna take say you took the old Chuck's restaurant, 1 level, you're gonna add 2 stories to that. How many units are you gonna get? You're not gonna get a lot of units, right? Because you're limited in parking to begin with.
Yeah,
But-
yeah.
No, there's no, right. That's a thing. But as we're speaking, these are these types of conversations we have on a regular basis, and
Yeah.
it's usually the parking's definitely one, and then this affordable housing one, because even that's a great example.
But you get parking there. That's a spot where you definitely
well,
have some parking.
The parking in the rear, we were there today, is actually Town of Danvers. It's not private parking.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
In the rear of that building?
Yeah. So, but
There you go.
these are the things that we are
But
constantly dealing
maybe
with.
you can use some of the shared parking, the town parking, or whatever,
Right.
because the intent is the restaurant's open during the day, people are gonna need the parking at night. But I mean,
Right.
in that example, you've got someone that could do it. It's gonna take them at least a year to build it. And then as they sell the units, it's gonna take some time, so maybe they have to pay it back over 3. Something creative, so it doesn't penalize the smaller guy.
The directive seems to be pretty clear. Come up with a couple of creative solutions to ease the pain.
Right, right.
We can do that.
I think if you do something like that, you're gonna see more people. I mean, look at, Ted Contos came in, and they were trying to sell the other side of the building there for a while. He's down on High Street, kind of across from the fire station. He came in with his sons, and they own the McDonald's plaza there. On the other side of that, closer toward the fire station, was the pizza place. They were trying to sell that a few times. I know that was on the market, and I think this probably didn't help it, the 35. I mean, it's a long, narrow strip, and you got parking, and you got some, contractor yard behind it, but the idea was, can we look at that whole piece and maybe add the residential piece and help that? I'm just trying to look at different sections of the town.
It's the parking and the affordable housing for
In
smaller projects that
The-
are barriers.
Yeah, but I think when the parking is it's really not that we have like crazy parking ratios. I think
Right,
it's
I
just
agree.
that there's
Right.
only so much, the downtown buildings take up most of the site, so
Unless
it's
you
just.
go underground, you're not
Yeah.
really, yeah.
But in order to, because underground parking is so expensive, you have to
Yeah, and then
you have
if
to
you
pay
add
for that,
35K
and
on
then
top
the
of
30,
that.
you know,
yeah.
it's all like connected, right? It's like a,
Yeah, I mean, right now in Danvers, it's probably close to 100K per space for structured parking, underground parking.
Yeah.
Probably 100, around there. I'll say 75 would be conservative. It used to be like 50 was the number. It's not 50 anymore.
Do we know what towns like Beverly or Salem, cities like that, charge for the affordable housing part? If you were doing a smaller,
I know that their deed restricted is similar in terms of the percentage. It's like that 12.5, 13%.
yep.
I don't know of the affordable. I can. We can.
You were in Winchester?
I was in Winchester. Yeah.
How did that relate?
We cared much more about units because we were at 1.8% when I started working there.
You mean 0.8?
Of subsidized housing inventory.
Wow.
We had, and housing was not allowed downtown by right when I started working there 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So we did but there's a train station downtown, and we did essentially a 40R, but not a 40R. But it's a full smart growth. It kicked in at, you had to give a unit at 6.
Okay.
So at 6 units, you're giving us a unit. So it was 10% deed restricted at 80% of AMI. And then 5% from middle income, 80 to 120. So we were very unique in that, requiring an AMI of 80 to 120. So we were
Charge
only
for-
at 10. So we were barely even meaning 10%. So we
Right.
weren't actually growing, and it was hard to get the 10. Put it that way.
What did you charge for less than the 6 units? Nothing
No.
for affordable housing? Did you get a lot of growth?
So the zoning changed in 2014, and it's a very different downtown compared to Danvers. We got basically 4 developments that were in process. One of them got appealed and was just finally done and over with. It's going to get built, so that's 36 units. And then there's a town-owned parcel that's actually going to be 60 units. So it takes, they say 6 to 12 years after you change the zoning for there to be some movement. So we're not there yet. I'm certainly not concerned that we don't have a whole bunch of developers knocking on our door.
we certainly get people certainly are interested. It just even, every building where there is kind of like that's underutilized or vacant, or a business has moved out, we definitely get calls, and it's a similar exercise that we're having right now. How many units can I do from the density point? What would be the affordable housing price? How many parking spaces would I need? And then it's just a constant conversation, and up and down the whole district.
Yeah, I would think Danvers Hardware is their most frequent question,
Yeah, not
since it's vacant.
right.
And it's attractive in the sense that it does have some parking, and
Right,
I would think that, and it's a large parcel.
for sure. I mean, I saw it today. It's missing some letters.
Yeah.
Definitely interested in improving that for sure. But I'm sure there'll be, because of the zoning. I mean, think about it. 3 years ago, you couldn't even do housing.
Right.
I mean, we're definitely in a good place from a zoning perspective to do I think what we want to do from a redevelopment.
But generally that timeline, it takes time for people to feel comfortable for change in general. So they're collecting rent, they're happy, things are working out. It's like you said, it's the ones with they're in the underutilized parcels and whatnot, when they start being like, I need to figure something out this year or I'm really in trouble. That's what this zoning 3 years ago kind of was trying to do. But again, it takes around that 6 to 12 years for you to see significant change where people actually see development and they actually be like, oh, you actually can get this through the planning board. This actually can work. many people are really shy to try to, you know, spend all this money and do all
Right.
these things if they don't know that there's clearly something going to happen there.
Yeah, you just don't want to have empty buildings. I mean, you've got Danvers Hardware, Cakes for Occasions is going out of there.
Okay,
You
didn't
you
know
don't
about
want to
that.
have several buildings go vacant, and now you end up like downtown Springfield or for a while in places that have economic blight. Not that we're going to have that, but you want to encourage and not make it easy for people because there's plenty of regulation in that bylaw, but fulfill the, you know, the dream of the downtown.
Yeah, and like I said, I think you're touching on more of what are we going to do with town center? Almost forget the zoning, but
Not forget it, but I mean, I'm trying to make it more palatable to those developers that if we truly want to, you know, I mean,
Investment, whatever.
you know, some of the shops that are down there, are, you know, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if anyone's talked to them. I mean, you got some nail salons, you got a cigar store, you've got some uses there that how long are they going to be able to make it downtown? I don't know.
no, I mean, I'm definitely seeing changes in terms of people's willingness to even start talking to the department. So, like Josh said, we do get people. You know, it takes time. So, like they'll ask questions, then we don't hear from them for
Yeah.
we won't hear from them for 6 months or something like
It,
that.
it does
you know?
happen all
right.
the time.
Like, but you know, we're only 3 years in. People are probably very, like I said, they don't know. You know, they know Maple Square went through, but that's all they really know.
Yep.
I mean, it just anecdotally, even that new building at next to Modern, next to the new Modern Butcher.
Yep.
I know
Yep.
on that first floor it looks, you know, like why aren't those spaces leased out? But in conversations with the property owner, he's had lots of interest with tenants. You know, I'm not sure exactly why he hasn't signed leases, but
Yeah. Well,
You
there's
know-
a few. I mean, that one, you got
Right.
Murphy's is for lease. You got, you know, there's several that are propping up now. You got
yeah,
right around that area that are vacant. And
the Giovanni's. We've been trying to work with someone on that Giovanni spot that's been kind of not looking great
yeah,
in the recent. So I guess what I'm trying to say at the macro is, there's definitely interest, and I'm surprised actually. Even like that 20 Locust,
Yep.
up a little bit further. Like we've got just tons of calls about. I mean, he leased up the whole first floor.
yep.
You need
No, that's good. I'm
You know,
encouraged by that. I'm
yeah.
encouraged by the new coffee place.
right,
I'm encouraged by the Modern Butcher.
right, and I don't know if you've
That's-
seen the lines outside.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
definitely
That's
gonna.
what you want. And those are the
Right.
types of
Right.
things that you said people are going to
Right.
stop because if you got a nice, we just got to keep it going.
Right.
Yeah, if you don't
gotta-
have a wide enough sidewalk to accommodate that line,
Right.
are you gonna stand in the street? Maybe, to be honest, for Modern. But
Yep.
the point is that the infrastructure and the placemaking have to be there to allow the developers to go, there's money here. So
It's kind of like
it's happening slowly. I don't think it's too slow at all. 3 years in terms of a huge zoning overhaul, which is exactly what that was. We're okay.
there's been people interested in that Bank of America, the project that you're referring to on Elm, the Bank of America. You know, all of the buildings and sites that you drive around, you're like, what's going on there? You know, they've reached out. What's happening? I'm interested. And then Brian said, we won't hear from them. We'll have the talk. They want to sit down. They've spent money. They have an engineer, attorney, and then I don't know what happens.
But
whatever.
It's not out of the realm of possibility for us to cold call these people and talk about the zoning and say, like, are you aware that you can do this? And that has happened. And a lot of sometimes
I-
people are like, I'm fine. I'm good.
Yeah.
Well, Nancy McCann obviously represents probably 90% of those developers, as
sure.
you know. And maybe she's got some feedback and/or, some of her clients.
She's a good sounding board.
Yeah.
She's come to these meetings.
Yeah, no, I see her almost on a weekly basis.
Yep. But I mean,
She's busy.
She's got her finger on the pulse, and if anybody's coming in for
It would
commercial
be,
development, they're gonna use her.
it would be interesting to hear if, her response to that question. For
Yeah.
sure.
I think it'd be helpful.
Sorry to interrupt, but I do have to run.
Yes.
I didn't have anything. My last thing was this. This is my last slide, last question.
When
What-
will this presentation be over?
What additional information would you like? Now is, whenever we answer that, the answer is now.
Is that all right? Because I know there's some minutes left, but three might be.
It does,
If the three of them can vote on
We
the
have a
minutes,
quorum, yeah.
you can
Yeah.
do it.
that's fine.
Are you okay with the minutes?
They all look fine to me. I
Great.
was only in one of them.
Yes.
All right, I'll see you Monday.
Thanks.
Okay.
So from what I heard, additional information on expanded transit. What else can we do? Potentially affordable housing type of a ramp up or something related to the 35. What else can we do? Maybe talk to a couple developers, couple lawyers. And while we're going into the zoning and changing the downtown zoning, it probably makes sense to do X, Y, Z. Any other, I'm going to review this meeting, so you no need to repeat, I guess, but if there's anything else, now's a good time, or you can email me. But the idea is that we are still trying to go for fall. If you don't think that that's doable, I personally think it is. But I will totally, take the information in, and we can work with whatever you need. Lou?
Question that I have, just is in terms of looking at the timeline, is state review of proposed changes. How is that, sometimes, how timely would they be able to get back in terms of anything?
Right, so
'Cause that's a big unknown.
we've already, we've given this timeline to the state and in our action plan, and it was approved, whether or not, meaning they know that we're trying to get something to them August, September, and they know we're trying to go for November.
Okay.
So I would say, as far as how complicated our bylaw is, most of the work is on us to put it in the compliance model.
Okay.
And the compliance model literally sells glow up red when you're not compliant.
Okay.
So you're putting numbers into all these things, and you can't move forward until it's all green.
Okay.
So that's like kind of step one, is the compliance model. So that we'll know whether we're compliant in terms of that. It's that other potential changes that I talked about related to the
Parking and-
bedroom count.
Yep.
That's the review. In terms of those numbers, the compliance model will show we're compliant. There's no review by the state. It's going to take a day. I mean, it's nothing.
I just
The
want to make
other
sure, because it's a pretty aggressive timeline, and
It
and
is.
so that's assuming a fast turnaround by the state, and if the state gets it and sits on it for a month, then
So-
that throws off the schedule.
So I think then the last thing that I'm hearing is that confirm the date, the timeline with the state, knowing full well we're trying to give you something by August, September, and that we'd like it by November. If they're saying that that's not okay, then I'll come back with new information. But
Right, and like it back by not just having it back by November, but having it back in time, because we'll be having public hearings as well.
yeah.
So making it back so we can have
One more
informed,
check
thorough-
after the state if there's changes. Is that you're saying build into the timeline that if the state says a change to go back to the public with
Because I
that
think what
change?
happened last time, what Lou might be alluding to, is we looked at something at the planning board level, and then there was a change at the FinCom level. It never came back to us, or it
That
came.
was something, yeah.
There was a snafu in that it wasn't, you have to go public hearings, planning board, then it gets to the selectmen, they approve it, then you go to the FinCom, and then.
FinCom didn't put it on they essentially voted to not put it on the,
Well, yeah, but
Yeah.
I think there was a tweak in between there that wasn't either brought back to us, or there was, so and I think what he's alluding to is if something changes after we've already had our public meetings, that throws off the whole, and now you're running into Thanksgiving, and people don't want to come out there. I mean, it's hard, the other thing is that why I was trying to ask about how many articles. If we're having 4 articles, it's not going to be easy to get people to come out, 100 town meeting members to come out for 4 articles. I don't have to go to that. I'm not demeaning people, but I mean, it's human nature, right? And especially if it's somewhat complex and you're trying to explain it or whoever's explaining it, and we don't show any slides, because we don't like to show slides at town meetings or lately, but you know, you gotta give, this is complicated stuff, right? And a lot of times people aren't gonna look at it until the night of, and if you tell them, you know, it's on the website, that's not a good response. So, I mean, I like to be very transparent, and in my history on the board, we always had slideshows, we had a lot of explanation, invite all the town meeting members to all those public hearings, and people will come. You won't get a majority of them, but you'll get people that are earnest and take the responsibility seriously. They will come and get the feedback and so on, but if we only have 3 or 4 articles, it's very expensive to hold a town meeting. You have it at the town hall, you get a lot of staff, you got police, you get this, that, and the other thing. So I'm trying to kind of bulk up the meeting and other things, like you said, the housekeeping things, which we seem to do every zoning board meeting, zoning planning town meeting, because there's always housekeeping, right? I mean, the other things that can make it sexy or attractive, but
So-
probably not. But I mean, in addition to whatever the town has to do with
I think, yeah, I
some
think
bylaw changes.
Aaron's talking about, I think, three or four related to adaptive reuse,
Study
the
committee.
Historic District Commission. I want to say it's 3 or 4 plus these two, so I think it's like in 5 or 6 at the moment.
Okay.
Okay.
The town might have some of their own stuff too, to throw in a change on the vote on the
But
budget hearing or something, but.
But that's good that you, I think,
Yeah.
I think I take this as a positive comment. that
No,
you-
they're all trying, believe me,
yeah.
I'm trying to be positive.
Yeah, yeah.
In noting, you know, usually we do it the week before Christmas or 2 weeks before Christmas, and
Uh-huh.
trying to get people with travel and all that in that time of year.
If you're, so that would be new to me. If you guys are want to go into December, that could make the timeline a little easier for sure. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know
wouldn't
what's
go
typical.
beyond the second week of December.
What's
maybe.
typical?
what I've
Hopefully
heard
it's good for the town meeting.
anecdotally
That's
was
what we've
it
done in
was
the past.
somewhere in that like
First week of December,
like mid-November.
mid-November. So that's what I thought it was like just before Thanksgiving, like
November
18th, 19th, 20th.
Yeah, like 13, 14, 15,
I
somewhere in
remember I
there.
was back in DC, so-
Well, I think I clearly need to figure out how many articles, in addition to the 2 that we're trying to do, and to make it worthwhile, like you said, and not having to have people go to a whole bunch of zoning meetings to get it all out in each meeting. Meaning, if we're like talk about all the zoning changes that we might be doing, and have 1 2.5 hour meeting covering all of them, and then maybe a follow up, rather than have one about MBTA, and then one about the historic district, and then one about that. You can see people will they will get fed up. I agree.
Because I think most historically in Danvers, ours in town meeting it's usually one night. It generally doesn't go to a second or third night.
No,
correct?
that's only happened, I think, once or twice.
Yeah. So I think that's
In my history.
yeah.
Well,
Typically one night, yeah.
so it sounds like you got to try to Goldilocks that right size in terms of number of articles, where if it's too much, it's going to go more than one night. But if it's not
Oh,
enough, and
we had over 50 at the Maytown meeting.
yes.
You
But
know,
as you know, zoning is
Controversial.
yeah,
complicated than most.
zoning, yeah. I don't think anything, I'm not seeing a lot of controversy on this. The other ones,
I mean,
You know.
You don't want
all the ones you see that you think they're going to be controversy, there usually isn't. But
Right.
I feel pretty confident that if there was going to be major controversy, it would have been in 2020
yep,
when this happened.
which
But I've been wrong
passed pretty much, not unanimously, but overwhelmingly.
without incident, from what I hear.
So again, it's a tweak based upon the MBTA requirements, and, you know, there's just some other, in our practice of working with the new zoning bylaw, these are some other housekeeping things, and, you know, the historic district stuff, and, yeah, we only do them every 3 years, so we might as well try to get as much as we can accomplished,
I think that's great.
you know?
Sounds good.
Gene, what do you think?
I think the good news is this is 2 years ahead of the deadlines.
Yeah?
That's when you
Then we
first
can
said
start
December-
applying.
done.
We can
when
start
said
applying for
December
more money.
25, I'm thinking, is that December, like, Christmas?
Well,
It's just
yeah.
the end of year. It probably just means like December 31st, 2025.
It is. It's, and by the way, the reason why it's so late is that it's giving towns that are not really like Danvers a couple of attempts at town meeting. The whole point is that they know that not only does it happen at most twice a year, but sometimes in communities it's only once a year. So it might seem like there's a really long timeline, but it's just based on it might take a couple of pushes to get it through town meeting. So that was the intent from the
Sure.
state.
What towns in our area are going to be facing a lot of changes?
I'd say just like communities like north of us who
Yeah,
don't.
the more rural communities, or not rural, like even like a Topsfield or something like that, like they're
You know,
it's really difficult for them to make it work without drastically changing their downtown or drastically, changing some other area.
even somewhere like not to like I don't know the details of it, but
No, that's what I was thinking.
somewhere like Hamilton that has a commuter rail, like towns that have
Right
commuter
there,
rail that
20%.
that are not large towns, right?
Yeah, and they're super low. It's like 30 feet. It's like you there's no way you can get 15 units per acre for a sea of 3-story buildings. Like it's just not gonna work.
Right.
So they're like, well, that's why we moved here. We moved here because we
Right.
wanted the 3-story buildings, and we're completely upending everything. Again, Danvers kind of did that upending 3 years ago, and they really almost hit the mark. I mean, we came very close.
Anything else from the board? No?
I really appreciate the feedback. It was a good conversation, well over an hour. So I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, Brian. All right. Josh, minutes?
We had a good amount of minutes. It might make sense, or a lot of them are quite, decently old. It might make sense for vote on them when Tori's here.
Okay.
But there is a set of minutes
One's
That-
from 2021.
that from our last meeting that we could. Oh, actually, but Jim wasn't here, so we might want.
Okay, yeah, we gotta wait on that then.
Okay.
Unless we did the November of, what was that?
Back. Yeah, it was.
But then the other one's January of 2022, so it probably would make sense just to table them for the moment.
Okay.
All right, yeah,
If-
that's January 20.
If it's the policy of is it the policy of the board, the preference to have at least 3 members vote on?
Well, yeah, you have to have 3 Robert's rules, so you gotta have 3 members. We don't have 3, and I wasn't at that meeting, so
Yep,
we
okay.
can't vote on that one.
That's fine. We can,
Um,
we'll just,
The other one, I don't know if Jean
No,
was
the-
there in 21?
yeah, that's the issue. I don't think at the time she would have been able to vote on it.
Not in
Yeah,
21.
the one from 2022 is just an associate.
Yeah, so
Associate.
we could just we could table them for the next meeting.
Okay.
Just while you're here, that June 13th meeting, there's potentially administrative matter. I'm not sure if we're going to get there, but I'll try and keep the board as much, give you as much lead time.
Okay.
We will have a meeting on the 27th. There was an application submitted.
27.
There was a site plan application submitted, so we will be having a meeting on June 27th.
Okay.
There's at least one item, so.
And Josh, as I mentioned, if we have a meeting on the 13th, I'll be away on travel, but I should be able to participate remotely.
Very good.
I'll be in Atlanta.
Do you know who the meeting is for, the applicant is for the 27th?
Yeah, it's a site plan application.
So what?
It's a site plan application for, I believe it's 103 Newberry. It's a mobile home park expansion.
Okay.
Would you be able to vote on that, Jim?
No, I'd be fine with that one.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the one that already went through ZBA.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Anything else for the board? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.